Imagine living your life after 50 and feeling energized and excited about your future. Welcome to the Women in the Middle podcast, the podcast for women who are ready to figure out what they want and create the life they deserve. Here's your host and master certified life coach, Susie Rosenstein.
Hey there, welcome back to the podcast, Women in the Middle. I'm your host, Susie Rosenstein, and I am so glad to be here with you again for this week's episode, which is another interview in my series called Getting Real with Women in the Middle. Getting Real introduces you to real-life women in the middle who have made a big, scary change and figured out how to love their midlife. Now, you may recall that I described the Women in the Middle podcast as really practical, authentic, and real. That's why I love the Getting Real series so much. Real women, real life. All right, let's get going. I am super excited to introduce you to my guest today. She's someone who's made a really difficult decision to sell her successful retail contemporary art gallery of about 20 years to pursue a career in her original area of professional interest, interior design, because she knew it was time for a change. She didn't know decision-making like this could be so hard, and she just has so much to share. So on that note, please welcome Sara Petroff. Sara, thanks so much for joining us today.
Pleasure, Susie.
All right, now you have quite a story to tell. Please let us know what was going on in your 40s.
40s was like the rat race where you have the blinders on. I had kids starting at 30. And so my kids at this point in my 40s, they were bar mitzvahs, they were the beginning of high school. There was lots of change, lots of...
like chaos, basically.
Chaos. Aging parents, growing kids. It was just a lot to juggle. And working full-time as an entrepreneur, there really... there's every ball that you could possibly imagine is in the air. And especially at 40, there's just so much you're juggling.
So when you were in your 40s, you were kind of already into a business for over 10 years, right? So 10, 15 years?
Yeah, I bought the gallery literally at 27. It was at a moment when my life changed dramatically. I bought it just after the passing of my mother and just put blinders on and felt like, I tuned out to everything else and kept going. And when I had kids, I literally strapped them on my front or on my back and kept them with me until they could roll over, and then I put them into daycare. You do whatever you have to do. I didn't have a mom, and you just work. And
it sounds kind of like that decision to dive into this business really helped you grieve and move forward.
Actually, I'll tell you honestly, it completely diverted me. I didn't realize that until I sold the business. When it came time to make that decision, and that was also a difficult decision, 20 years later, it was I couldn't believe how difficult that decision was, and I didn't realize how much of it was rolled up with that grieving that never actually really happened. I didn't realize that I had just, all those stages that they talk about that you go through, you still go through them even if you put it on hold for 20 years. So that's what happened. It actually didn't help me. It kind of just put it off.
It helped you. It helped you put your head in the sand.
Right.
That's so interesting because a lot of the women in the middle who are listening have told me that once they've been in a job for, a couple of decades, there's just so much going on and so much that they're unaware of that's going on. And mostly it has to do with their own needs. They just have had their head to the grindstone, been just going through life, this chaotic phase of a couple of decades, which it really is in your 30s and 40s where you're trying to establish so much for your family And then all of a sudden they get to this point, which I call a midlife funk. So I know that you hit the funk. Oh. Tell me a little bit about how funky it got for you.
I hit the funk. I hit the floor. I hit a wall. When it's true. Like you focus so myopically during that time just to get through every single day that you don't realize bigger horizons and possibilities that are still out there and available to you. So my funk really happened when we made the decision to sell our business. Part of it was just time-based. It was 20 years. Our lease came up. We had to make a decision. Do we stay? Do we move? And so that started the thought process. We also saw that there was a big transportation thing happening on this major thoroughfare where our business was. There was an LRT that was going to be under construction for the next 5 to 8 years.
Yeah, public transportation can really affect businesses when you're on a main drag.
Huge, and most, especially when your business is a walk-in business, it's just it makes a huge impact. So we had to make a couple of decisions. And then I also realized my husband and I worked together for about 14 of those 20 years, and very successfully in both, our marriage and our business. But I also knew that he was really not fulfilling his full potential either. And that, when you see somebody you love who's not really flying as high as they could be, you really want to give them that kind of freedom. And I said, I've done this. I've done this for 20 years. I've fulfilled this dream. I feel very satiated with it. And we are still young enough to regroup and re-gear and find our new paths. So, it's one thing when you jump careers, when one person in the relationship jumps a career. It's scary. When two people at the same time jump out of the same airplane with no parachute, it's terrifying.
Oh my God. So tell me, before we get into the free fall, tell me a little bit about how long this funk lasted.
Oh.
Because I know when it happened to me, I was in a funk for a good 5 years. So when you reflect on it, with, in hindsight, when you can see so much more, maybe it started out with just an inkling of a thought, and then the lease notice came, like, who knows? But how long do you think you were feeling funky?
Oh, boy. I would say a year before we sold. As soon as we started that thought process, feelings of failure started to creep in, which, if you think about it, now in retrospect is ridiculous. When you have an entrepreneurial business in the arts that has thrived for 20 years, enough that you can actually sell that business, it is not a failure. But when you are subjectively in that situation, you can't help but feel that what I have built is all now coming. It's all crashing. So I would say a year before and 2 years after, there was a full year after selling, a full year that I refer to as television static. I don't know whether you know when you have that white snow, and that was a year. And so I would say in total there were about 3 years that were funky.
Yeah, that's so interesting because it is a new beginning. And as we talk about this all the time on this podcast, that mindset is everything. And really, you're just one thought away from feeling completely differently about anything. And so this really is a new opportunity. The thing that is neutral is that there's a date of an actual sale of the business. And then what you make it mean is completely subjective. And so you eventually got to the other side of it. And so tell me, once you decided, what was it like to actually decide and see that opportunity was everywhere? What was that all like?
Well, you know what? Quite honestly, I didn't see that opportunity was everywhere. People around me saw that opportunity was everywhere, and I had a great support network of people who could see in me things that I was blind to. And in my mind, I was having thoughts like, what could I possibly offer? What could I possibly do now? I'm washed up. There's nothing, there's nothing else that I could possibly do. And which was a debilitating thought, absolutely debilitating. But people, all my friends around me said, "Are you kidding me? You are incredibly talented. You are incredibly smart. You're incredibly capable. This, and that." And they buoyed me through that until the light started turning on for me, and I started to realize, okay, you know what? I can do this. I was actually blessed with a first client who didn't realize that she was actually my first client back to interior design, because I was a designer before I bought the gallery, and then 20 years later, coming back to the industry, she didn't realize that she was the first one, but I realized after that God blesses you in one way or another with the sending you the right people. And this was somebody who was just incredibly understanding, it was just a great first client. And from there, it just hasn't stopped. Every time I start to wrap up a project, the phone rings with another 2 people.
There's so much about your story that I love. So the first thing is that what you're describing as not realizing your gifts is so common with women in the middle. And the reason for this is complex, but one reason is because we really, at our age now, we really haven't been focusing on ourselves for a very long time. So if it's really branding yourself and understanding what you have to give, no matter your circumstance. There's a big shift for many of us where we're going from being employed by somebody else or just doing one thing as an entrepreneur for 20 years. But you really don't think of yourself naturally outside that situation. And really getting to know, becoming very intimately connected again to who you are at your core and what your core gifts are is a transition that's very common in midlife. And I can see the way you're talking about it, you needed to become reacquainted with who you were at your core, and you didn't see it at first. And once you became introduced again, the floodgates just opened. I just love that part of your story. And the other thing that I think is so fascinating is that what you originally loved is what you still love today. And it's what you came back to. And it sounds like it's full-blown creativity as an interior designer.
Yeah, any form of design. I have always been a completely creative problem solver. And aside from all of you had a word for it. It was like the administrivia.
Yeah.
Aside from administrivia that we have to do in all of our businesses, just creative problem solving is really my forte, and it's my passion, and it is every space I walk into, I can't help it. That's what I see. It's what I think. It's what how would I make this better? How would I change this? How would I, and it has been incredibly life affirming to realize that what drove me as a youth, it is who I am at my core. And, it's incredibly gratifying to realize that your skills are recognized and that you can, it's not about the name. It's not about the status. That was a huge one to leave with the gallery. Just when it's just you and a pen and a paper, it's like being on a yoga mat.
I don't know that, actually. And we've talked about that here in the podcast, at how yoga pants can be a way for you to hide your weight gain.
That's all I wear are yoga pants.
Yes, you're not alone. We had a whole episode on that 2 weeks ago. And actually what you're talking about now is something we started to talk about a little bit last week in the podcast. And I talked about my marching band jacket and some of the things that were so important to us in our youth. And when we take another look at it now, as an older and wiser woman in the middle, you can see so much about why those initial things that we loved and were fascinated with and attracted to in childhood still hold fascination today. And I'm sure when you look to your childhood and you look to what you studied in school and what some of your initial ways to occupy your time were when you were a young, you're still young, of course, but, a youth, you'll see that you've kind of done a full circle here and you're pulling in more and more and more of the kinds of things that you were just so in love with, the way you spent your time when you were younger.
But getting there.
Yeah, exactly.
But getting there. I do want to say that during that funk, and when you're going through large change in your life, that those very uncomfortable choices and spaces that make you want to run the other direction is exactly what you actually have to turn and walk right through. You actually have to, that which you want to run from the most is really what you have to turn and go through.
Oh, I love that you said that because what I was going to ask you was, what would your future self tell you now? What kind of advice do you have to women who are freaking out about, they're on the brink of doing something scary, but in their heart of hearts, they're drawn to it. So what is that? What is the thing that helped you keep moving forward when you were facing some of the most fear that you've ever experienced?
I'm going to have to tell you honestly, I think it's a compilation. It's a compilation of introspection, honest introspection, that makes you realize, you know what, I actually can do this. And people around you who are very supportive, therapy, meds, whatever it takes. Seriously, whatever
Yep.
it takes to get through, because it's not easy. Going through major change, whether it's the loss of someone you love, it's a loss of a job, there is a sense of loss. No matter how you structure it, there's a sense of loss. So there's this grieving process and a sort of a reawakening of yourself. And being, what would I tell myself? Being very kind to yourself. There's an exercise. What would you say if you were to find yourself at 5 years old and in the same scary kind of situations, what would you tell your 5-year-old self? It's no different. You're
Exactly. That's something that is a real thing when I work with my clients when they're being hard on themselves and just choosing to think thoughts that are really mean. And I say, what would you tell a little kid in your life right now? What would you tell them? And what would you tell yourself exactly? So you wouldn't continue to be mean to yourself. You'd be encouraging. You'd be compassionate. You'd be loving. And one of the questions that I often ask people to consider is, what is the solution with love?
What is the solution with love?
With love. What would love do right now? If you added love into the equation when you're freaking out, it's just, when we think about being compassionate with ourselves, we still have a little bit of resistance that we're not worth it, or I'm a delicate flower and my situation is a little different, or come on now, that works for other people but not for me. But somehow when you ask the question about, well, what would love do? It kicks it up one more level and it detaches you a little bit from sometimes victim mentality.
I think it changes the lens more than anything, so that when you see the world from a position of fear and insecurity, questioning, that fear of the unknown and that terror, you are closed off to opportunity and you're closed off to possibility. When you use the lens through of love, from the same situation that you're in, so much more is open to you. So much more is possible. You know, it changes the funnel so that instead of it coming to an acute angle because there's only so many things that you can do and you've like hit your peak, it opens it the other way where you're starting at a point and you are open to anything.
It's amazing, isn't it, how much opportunity you have right now? Things you couldn't ever have expected is my guess.
Yeah. I'm actually on the cusp of possibly yet another career move, which would be sort of an amazing next progression of that would allow me just to just focus in on what it is that I love to do on my terms, on the number of days a week that I want to work. So leaving me time to do creative work of my own. Like it just, if you're very clear with yourself and you say, you know, I've got fewer days ahead of me than I have behind me, you become far more precise and clear about what your objectives are, what you're willing or not willing to tolerate, and not needing to please other people, that you realize, you know what, I at this point, I'm doing this for myself, and the amount of enjoyment is much more.
It's shocking.
Yeah, it is
and
shocking.
This, my friends, is what I call regret-proofing your life with gusto. Because if you don't reconnect with your core, your authentic self, now some of us have a harder time finding the clues of what that is, but if you don't, you may, in fact, have regrets. And what I hear you saying is that you are ready for just about anything that comes your way with a giant creative energy and an excitement about your life after 50, which is what I love, love, love to hear. So, Sara, how can people see your work and contact you?
You can take a look at petroffdesign.com. I have a webpage. There's also a house page. I'm sure if you look hard enough, you'll find it.
Oh, they won't have to look hard. I'm going to put these links right on my show notes. Don't worry. Sara, thanks so much for sharing your story with Women in the Middle. One thing we know for sure is that we are not alone and we're not getting any younger. Fear can be a big obstacle when it comes to decision making. There's so much more that we're capable of, even though it can be scary as hell. Your story was really inspiring, and I know it will help so many listeners. Thank you so much. That's it for this episode. If you like what you've heard, just head over to the Women in the Middle podcast on iTunes and leave me a review. You know that makes me so happy. Check out the show notes for Sara's links and more information at www.susierosenstein.com. Let's do this, ladies, one scary but exciting dream at a time. Thanks so much for listening.